Number 1. Lennis Escobar, the Little Devil. Reporters were inside the courtroom when the gang associate was finally found guilty. In April 2017, a quiet Long Island neighborhood was shattered by a crime that grabbed national headlines. She was a young girl who lived a hard life without parents, facing physical and mental abuse as she grew up. 4 teenagers were killed in a gang ambush, one of the deadliest attacks the gang had committed in years. And at the center was 17-year-old Lennis Escobar. Known by the nickname La Diablita, her role in these brutal murders stunned both the public and the police. Lennis was born in Queens to parents who had immigrated from El Salvador. From the outside, she lived like any other teenager in the area. She stayed active online and spent time with friends around her working-class New York neighborhood. But in the shadows, she was sliding into a dangerous world. Police eventually found her ties to MS-13 and her use of secret gang codes online. Her posts signaled total loyalty to the group. By 17, she was no longer just a bystander. She was deep in the lifestyle. Investigators say she was trying to climb the ranks of MS-13 by helping plan a violent act with a massive impact. That terrible vision became reality on the night of April 11th, 2017. Lennis and her gang-affiliated boyfriend invited 5 boys to a wooded area in central Islip that evening on a simple pretense. The boys believed they were just going to hang out and smoke, but a group of gang members was waiting in the shadows, armed with machetes, knives, and wooden clubs. As they walked in, the trap snapped shut. It was a cold, calculated attack. In only a few minutes, 4 of the 5 teenagers were killed. 1 boy survived, and his story helped police piece together that night of horror. Though she didn't swing a weapon, her role was chilling. She set the trap, lured the victims, and watched the violence unfold. She later used gang slang on social media to brag about the brutal murders. Investigators found messages on her phone that linked her to the entire plot. Her trial began in 2022, telling the story of a girl who made deliberate choices rather than being forced into it. Prosecutors described her as a calculating mind behind the carnage. While her defense claimed she just wanted to fit in, the jury wasn't convinced. She was found guilty of racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge gave her 50 years, making it clear her age changed nothing. The court noted her actions were both intentional and completely devastating. Her crimes reflected careful planning rather than some youthful mistake. The case proved how easily these gangs can recruit even young girls into their operations. It also showed how social media can blur the line between performance and real violence. Today, she remains behind federal prison bars. Her story is a dark reminder of how a normal teen can commit horrific gang crimes. The families finally saw some justice. The pain will never truly leave. For many, this case remains a sobering reminder that gang violence does not always look the way we expect. It can look like a teenage girl holding a lethal plan. Number 2. Carla Jacqueline Morales. In June 2018, Houston police responded to a crime that was both brutal and tragically familiar. A young man lay dead in a field, showing gang signs. But the real shock was the accomplice. It was about who helped. Carla Jacqueline Morales, a 21-year-old with no record, played a central role in planning the murder. She soon became one of the most wanted women in America. The victim was 24-year-old Jose Alonso Villanueva, a man who once considered Morales a friend. They were close, and she used that trust to kill. According to prosecutors, she reached out to Villanueva and invited him to meet her at a secluded spot on the edge of the city. The location was isolated, a perfect spot for a trap. She told him they were just hanging out, but the hit was already planned. Morales was not working alone. She had ties to a local MS-13 clique, operating quietly in the Houston area. This specific group had been tracking Villanueva for quite some time. He was accused of showing disrespect, a vague charge that often carries a death sentence in MS-13 culture. Morales acted as the bait. Once he arrived, the gang members ambushed him in a truly horrific way. He was attacked with a machete and shot repeatedly. The ambush was fast, violent, and cold-blooded. By the time law enforcement reached the scene, there was nothing they could do to save him. Evidence found at the site, like shell casings and footprints, pointed straight to organized gang activity. Investigators were chilled not just by the murder, but by how heartlessly Morales had set it up. She did not just happen to be there. She coordinated the hit through phone calls with the gang, tracking his every move. Surveillance footage, text messages, and witnesses confirmed she helped plan every step. After the killing, she disappeared. By the time a warrant was issued, she had already fled the Houston area. The FBI quickly added her to their most wanted list, calling her a key figure in a gang-related homicide. Her face was broadcast across national media with a reward offered for her capture, but for months, there were no signs of her anywhere. Authorities chased leads across Texas and beyond, fearing she had crossed state lines or even fled the country entirely. Finally, in the fall of 2019, she was located and arrested without incident. Her time on the run was over, and she was brought back to face justice. In court, the prosecution described her as a willing and active participant in a cold execution. They showed how she used their friendship to gain his trust before leading him to his death. She did not actually kill him herself, but without her, the murder never would have happened. The defense claimed she was just being manipulated by the gang. However, the evidence showed a woman who was calculated, cooperative, and fully aware of her actions. In 2020, Carla Jacqueline Morales was convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison. The judge acknowledged she was young but insisted her role in the crime was deliberate and grave. "You might not have held the weapon," he told her, "but you put him exactly where the killers wanted him. That is a weight you will have to live with." This case was haunting because it challenged everything people thought they knew about who commits these crimes. Morales did not look like a gang member. She had no tattoos and no criminal record to speak of. She was a young woman who blended in, yet she played a lead role in a gang execution. It proved that MS-13's reach goes far beyond outward appearances. Her story is a grim reminder that gang influence is often hidden and hard to spot. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones capable of the worst betrayals. Today, Morales is serving her sentence in a Texas state prison, and she will be middle-aged before she is even eligible for release. For the family of Jose Alonso Villanueva, the verdict brought some peace, but it can never fully undo the tragedy of that night. This case remains a terrifying example of how gangs use manipulation and trust as deadly tools to achieve their violent goals. Number 3. Lydia del Carmen Rodriguez. In 2019, a horrifying crime in New York once again brought national attention to MS-13's presence in the United States. Once more, the person behind the brutal violence was someone nobody would have expected. Her name was Lydia del Carmen Rodriguez, a young woman prosecutors say helped kill a 15-year-old boy. She was no mere follower. She was directly involved in a killing that left an entire community reeling. The victim, unnamed due to his age, had recently left MS-13. In the gang world, trying to leave is seen as the ultimate sin. To MS-13, it is a betrayal, and that betrayal is usually punished by death. Today, you and I are looking at where Lydia entered the story. Back then, she was a known associate of a violent MS-13 faction operating in the region. She was no innocent bystander. This was not a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Court records show she helped plot the killing, handled the phone calls, and managed the logistics. She coordinated the movements that ensured the victim would be in the exact spot, the fatal spot at the right time. It started with an interaction that looked completely harmless. Days before the hit, Lydia messaged the victim. She set up a meeting under the guise of just hanging out. Detectives believe she was the lure. He had no reason to suspect the trap being set for him. On the day of the attack, the teenager arrived at a wooded area in central Islip. Within moments, MS-13 members ambushed him, beating and stabbing him over and over. His body was found soon after, dumped in the brush, and left for dead. It was a message to anyone considering leaving the gang, but the community was stunned that someone like Lydia was involved in such a horrific crime. She did not look like the typical image of a gang killer. She was young and soft-spoken, showing zero outward signs of gang ties. But investigators soon uncovered phone records, text messages, and surveillance footage that tied her directly to the cold-blooded planning of the murder. When police brought her in for questioning, the puzzle finally started coming together. Under pressure from the law, witnesses finally stepped forward and began talking. They described her involvement as deliberate and intentional. It was not fear or coercion, it was a choice. She knew what was happening, and she played her part perfectly. By doing that, she helped end a young life before it ever truly began. Federal prosecutors charged her with racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder. At trial, the prosecution showed a timeline of her messages with MS-13 members, proving she had helped organize the hit well in advance. They made it clear that while she did not swing the knife herself, her role was absolutely crucial to making it happen. Lydia pleaded guilty in federal court in 2022. She admitted her role in the killing and finally accepted responsibility for helping facilitate the brutal attack. Because of that, she dodged a life sentence, but she was still handed a lengthy prison term that will keep her behind bars for several decades. The exact details of her sentence were never released because of the sensitive nature of the case and her ongoing cooperation with the federal authorities. The courtroom fell silent as the judge handed down her fate. The judge noted the calculated nature of her actions, stressing that planning a murder is just as serious as the act of carrying it out. "You might not have held the knife," he said, "but without your help, this crime never happens. You are the one who made the ambush possible." Her story is a chilling reminder that MS-13 relies on more than just physical force. They use trust and manipulation. They use calculated social moves, and the gang often casts women in those specific roles. Lydia was not an enforcer, but she was an enabler. She set it up. Today, she is sitting in a federal prison. Her cooperation with the law remains classified. Whether she gave up other MS-13 members or helped take down the local clique remains a total mystery to us. One thing is certain: a 15-year-old boy is dead, and Lydia Rodriguez helped make it happen. Her case scarred the community, just another tragedy in the long, dark history of MS-13. For many of us, it also raised deeper questions. How does someone so young and unassuming end up helping a gang commit such a cold-blooded murder? And how many others like her are still out there, playing quiet, deadly roles in gang violence that go unnoticed until it is too late? Number 4. Sylvia Lorena Bonilla de Andres. In the summer of 2022, federal agents arrested a woman in Northern Virginia. At first glance, she looked like any other resident in her quiet suburban neighborhood. Her name was Sylvia Lena Bonilla de Andres. To her neighbors, she was just another face in the crowd, someone blending perfectly into her quiet suburban background. But the authorities knew better. Sylvia was wanted in El Salvador for MS-13 crimes. Her arrest revealed the terrifying hidden reach of the gang's global network. Her story starts in El Salvador. There, she was linked to multiple crimes, including extortion, blackmail. She was tied to terrorist groups, charges El Salvador often uses against those associated with the MS-13 gang and its many affiliates. Over several years, she quietly slipped into the United States and settled in Virginia, staying far under the radar. She managed to keep a low profile for a while, but her dark history eventually caught up with her. Let's look at the case authorities in El Salvador spent years building against her. She allegedly helped coordinate extortion, using threats against families and businesses to collect cash from victims who were too terrified to fight back. Detectives say Sylvia wasn't always the one delivering the threats in person. Instead, she handled communications, set payment schedules, and kept the gang's money moving. Essentially, she made sure the criminal extortion racket ran perfectly from the shadows. By the time American police found her, she had built a whole new life. But that facade collapsed when her name appeared during a joint operation. Once they verified her identity and the foreign charges, Homeland Security moved in for the arrest. Agents caught her during a standard patrol right near her home. Reports indicate she didn't fight back and was taken to jail without any trouble. But this arrest was far from ordinary. To the police, she was a major player who used her quiet life as a shield while staying deeply connected to one of the most dangerous gangs in the world. The charges waiting for her in El Salvador were incredibly severe. Prosecutors claimed she ran the financial side of MS-13's operations, a role just as critical to the gang's survival as the brutal violence they used to maintain control. Shakedowns and extortion have always been the foundation of MS-13's power in Central America. Small shops, street vendors, and even taxi drivers are forced to pay the gang rent under threat of death. Sylvia allegedly helped manage every part of that system, tracking the records, organizing the cash, and ensuring the profits reached the gang leaders. Her case exposed a critical part of MS-13's overall strategy. While the men handle the violence, women are often used in quieter roles as coordinators, messengers, or handlers. They blend in easily and avoid suspicion in quiet neighborhoods. But don't be fooled, those behind-the-scenes roles are just as dangerous as the gunmen. Following the arrest, she sat in detention while El Salvador filed the paperwork to bring her back. Because the evidence was so strong and the crime so severe, US officials approved the request to extradite her. Within a few months, she was flown back to El Salvador to stand trial. During her first hearing in San Salvador, prosecutors laid out her role in the extortion plot, using phone logs and witness statements as proof. Her lawyers argued that she had quit the gang years ago and had no further contact with them. But the evidence told a different story, showing money transfers that continued long after she moved to America. The trial continues today, and Sylvia remains behind bars in El Salvador while she waits for the final verdict. No matter how it ends, for you and me, her case is a stark reminder that MS-13's reach crosses every border, and their most dangerous members aren't holding guns, but managing the money. Sylvia Lorena Bonilla de Gendres wasn't a name that made headlines before her capture. She never drew any suspicion from the people living around her. But behind the scenes, police say she fueled a campaign of terror and violence, one payment at a time. Her story reveals a hidden but incredibly damaging side of the MS-13 criminal empire. It is a chilling example of how deep those criminal roots can grow, even in quiet places where nobody would ever expect them. Number 5. An unnamed female MS-13 member arrested in Texas. In early 2023, Border Patrol agents near McAllen stopped what looked like a standard smuggling operation along the Rio Grande. It was just another incident that agents respond to every single week, a group of migrants moving through rough terrain, trying to enter the United States. But this time, hiding within the group was someone far more dangerous than the rest. Blending in perfectly was a woman with a long criminal record and direct ties to MS-13. Officials didn't release her name to the public, but the details they shared painted a terrifying picture. She was a Salvadoran national with confirmed gang ties, specifically to the violent organization known as MS-13. What made this arrest so significant was her criminal history in America, which stretched back more than a decade. This was no first-time offender. Today, you and I are looking at a woman who was arrested, deported, and caught trying to sneak back in. Federal records show she once lived in Virginia, where police arrested her for embezzlement back in 2008. That charge might not look violent at first glance, but it was just one piece of a darker pattern. Her name eventually surfaced in multiple gang investigations. Homeland Security flagged her profile as a high-risk individual with deep ties to criminal enterprises, including the notorious MS-13. During her 2023 arrest, she was moving with a group trying to cross the border through a high-traffic smuggling corridor in the Rio Grande Valley. Border protection agents were sweeping the area when they stumbled upon the group of migrants. Most of them were rounded up for processing right away, but when agents checked her fingerprints, a match popped up. It wasn't just old immigration issues, it was a history of criminal offences and a direct link to the gang. Officers pulled her from the crowd and took her into custody for a deeper interrogation. What agents uncovered over the next 24 hours added a chilling new layer. Even after being deported, she fought her way back to the border. This time, she wasn't just a migrant, she was a potential operative for MS-13. The details of her mission stay classified, but officials believe she was sneaking back to reunite with gang members already active in Texas and up and down the East Coast. Her case highlights a growing trend. Recently, authorities have seen more women in MS-13 taking on active, high-level roles in the organization, not just in support roles, but in recruitment, communication, and even handling smuggling logistics. Women like her are often missed by police because they don't look like typical gang enforcers. They are quieter, more mobile, and far harder for investigators to track down. The Rio Grande Valley has always been a key gateway for gangs like MS-13. The vast rural landscape is perfect for smugglers trying to stay off the radar. But you and I have to understand how these networks use the area not just to move people, but to move influence. Not everyone crossing the border is simply looking for safety or work. Sometimes they are linking back up with international criminal networks. After the arrest, she was handed over to federal agents and held for immigration crimes and her previous criminal history. Her full file stays sealed, but the public details tell a clear story. She was tied to a violent global gang and had already been kicked out of the country for earlier crimes. It is still unclear if she will face fresh charges or deportation, but officials warn that cases like hers are becoming common. They are a constant challenge for police trying to identify people who aren't just undocumented, but genuinely dangerous. When we think of MS-13, we usually imagine tattooed men in prison yards or street battles. The truth is more complex. Women have always been involved, serving as everything from simple accomplices to high-level leaders. And others, like this woman, lived double lives for years across several countries, allowing them to operate deep in the shadows. This arrest didn't make headlines, but you and I can see why police take it seriously. It shows how gangs adapt. They evolve and cross borders strategically, not just physically. And sometimes, it's the person you would never suspect who poses the biggest threat. Number 6. Flocka, the girl who left. In the brutal world of MS-13, quitting is rarely an option. For this gang, betrayal demands blood. Those who try to leave are seen as nothing more than traitors. That is exactly what makes the story of Flocka so extraordinary. Her real name has never been released for her own safety, but in the streets of El Salvador, she was known as Flaca, a nickname meaning skinny. She was one of the very few women to escape the gang's grip and survive to tell the tale. The things she revealed painted a haunting picture of what life is actually like for women on the inside. Flocka grew up in a poor, dangerous neighborhood in El Salvador. In her world, the gang was everywhere. It was simply a fact of life. From childhood, she lived surrounded by violence, intimidation, and constant fear. Most kids there had family in their life. By the time she was 12, Flocka's future was already being shaped by dark forces far beyond her control. She didn't join the gang because she was curious or excited. For her, joining was about survival. As a teenager, a local clique recruited her right off the street. They promised her protection and a new family. And for a short time, she actually believed their lies. Let's look at how they offered her status and a place to belong. But that promise was a lie. Flaca soon discovered that the women of MS-13 were never treated the same as the men. While some girls acted as lookouts, others were trapped in a dark cycle of abuse and control. She was treated as common property, forced into relationships against her will, and expected to stay loyal through every nightmare. Years later, she admitted in an anonymous interview that being a woman there meant being owned by the gang. She said, "You belong to the gang. You are not allowed to say no. You do not have a voice." Flaca faced beatings for any disobedience, kept under a constant watch with death threats if she ever left. Despite the mortal danger, she decided she could not live that life anymore. The fear and control became too much. Slowly, she began pulling away, changing her daily habits and avoiding any contact with the clique. It was a massive gamble. Every hour she stayed away made it more likely they would come for her. Eventually, she found a way out. Her escape was not dramatic, with no running through jungles or crossing borders. She sought help from a local church, one of the rare places where gang members can turn to leave. The church provided a lifeline, offering her spiritual support, a safe shelter, and a new identity. Flaca started rebuilding her life, but the road was hard. The mental scars of the gang were incredibly deep. She lived with PTSD and the paralyzing fear that someone from her past would eventually recognize her. She stayed committed to her new life, cutting all ties and helping others who were trying to escape. Through faith and determination, she became a quiet advocate for the lost. Her story eventually reached Insight Crime, an investigative organization that spends its time looking into the dark underworld of organized crime in Latin America. In that interview, she pleaded for her identity to remain a complete secret. With her voice masked and location undisclosed, she knew that even after starting over, the threat of MS-13 never fully disappears. Now, you and I can see that Flaca's story is different from the others on this list. There were no handcuffs or headlines. She never faced a judge or committed a high-profile murder. Yet, the internal war she won is just as powerful as any courtroom drama. Her journey reveals the grim reality of being a woman inside MS-13, and why so many who try to leave simply never get the chance. She is not entirely free, and she likely never will be. But by speaking out anonymously, Flaca has done something that was incredibly brave. She helped the world see the hidden horrors and the immense difficulty of walking away from that life. For every survivor like her, countless others are lost to the silence of the gang world. Some are silenced forever for trying to leave. Others simply see no way out of the trap. As you and I reflect on her journey, we see that reclaiming an identity is the ultimate victory over a life of fear. Number 7. Kay Gomez. In 2017, a quiet New York suburb became the epicenter of one of the most chilling crimes in history. 4 teenage boys were lured into a park and brutally killed by members of the MS-13 gang. It was a message meant to terrorize the neighborhood and prove the gang's local dominance. Most remember the face of Lennis Escobar, known as La Diabla, but behind the headlines, 23-year-old Kay Gomez was also there, quietly pulling the strings from the shadows. She did not carry a machete or flash gang signs, which is why her name did not appear in any of the early news reports, but eventually, the truth surfaced. Detectives eventually discovered that Gomez was a key architect of the ambush, helping to plan and set it in motion. Without her involvement, the murders might never have happened. The victims were 5 local boys who had either spoken out or distanced themselves from the gang entirely. In that hyper-violent world, even a hint of disrespect is enough to get a death sentence. The plan to take them out was cold, calculated, and required someone the boys would trust. That is exactly why the gang recruited Kay Gomez for the job. Along with Escobar, she helped coordinate the communication that would lead the unsuspecting victims to their deaths. She used casual texts to arrange a late-night meeting in the local park. It was framed as a harmless hangout, but it was a deadly trap from the start. While Escobar led the boys into the woods, Gomez stayed behind the scenes, watching her plan unfold from a safe distance while the violence occurred. She followed their movements, made sure the timing was perfect, and confirmed when they had finally arrived. When the victims walked into the trap, several MS-13 members jumped from the shadows with machetes and bats. 4 of the boys were murdered. The 5th barely escaped, and his eyewitness account would later become the centerpiece of the entire investigation. Initially, Gomez's name never surfaced in the news or the official court documents. She was never spotted at the scene, but months later, detectives started following a trail of digital footprints. Phone records and social media messages began to tell the story. Her text showed she was coordinating with the gang. Her voice was caught on audio recordings. When everything came together, it was obvious she didn't just know about the murders, she helped make them happen. Once the police finally arrested Gomez and brought her in for questioning, she looked them in the eye and denied everything. She claimed she was not involved and had no idea what the gang was actually planning to do. But the evidence told a different story, and the prosecutors were already preparing to bring formal charges against her. Facing a potential life sentence, Gomez made a decision that changed the case forever. She agreed to cooperate with the feds. To save herself from a long sentence, Kay Gomez stood in court and testified against her own partners. She broke down the entire plan, from the messages to the specific roles. Her words were absolutely devastating in court. Her testimony helped secure convictions for Lennis Escobar and several other MS-13 members. Prosecutors later admitted her cooperation was a key reason the case ended with so many convictions. Not everyone believed she was sorry. The victims' families saw her testimony as an act of survival, not a sign of real remorse. They felt that if the evidence had not been so strong, she never would have opened her mouth. Others saw a girl who was in way over her head, finally forced to face the consequences of her choices. The details of her plea deal weren't public, but we know that Gomez managed to avoid the most severe penalties. She received a lighter sentence, but her location is still a secret because she is now a protected witness. Right now, she is still in federal custody, serving her time in a highly protected environment. She might walk free one day, but her role in such a brutal killing is a shadow she can never escape. That kind of blood is a stain that no amount of cooperation can ever truly wash away. Kay Gomez's story matters because it shows how MS-13 really works. They don't just rely on obvious street thugs. The gang depends on people who can blend in and build trust without making anyone suspicious. They need informants to gather information and set up hits without raising flags. Often, women fill these roles because they can move in ways the men simply cannot. Gomez might not have held the weapon herself that night, but she was a vital part of the machine that made those murders happen. She was invisible to her victims until it was far too late. Her case proves that even those who never touch a weapon still leave a trail. Number 8. The Black Widow's clique. In MS-13, violence is usually loud, brutal, and completely heartless. Everyone knows them for street-level savagery, from machete attacks to public executions intended to terrify the community. But one disturbing case showed a different side of the gang. This violence was calculated, intimate, and led by women. These women were not just girlfriends or low-level soldiers on the side. They were the masterminds known as the Black Widows. a group that shocked investigators all across Central America. This clique operated in the shadows for years, far different from the traditional image of an MS-13 gang. They did not care about turf wars. Instead, they specialized in a deadly and personal game of romance-based targeting. Court documents reveal that these women would find unsuspecting men and lure them into marriage. They targeted the old or the lonely. They would arrange the murders for cash and gang prestige. It always started with a relationship that seemed innocent, often beginning through family or local connections. A woman would start dating a man, whisper promises of love, and eventually convince him to marry her. Once they were married, the trap was set. The husbands truly believed they had found love, having no clue what was coming. But to these black widows, these men were nothing more than a mission. After the wedding, the group used the husband's name to steal his money, his land, or his government benefits. Then, without any warning, they would have him kidnapped and executed by gang members associated with their deadly and dangerous clique. The crime scenes were cold and calculated, leaving behind almost no evidence that could link the women to the murder. That was precisely what made their operation so successful and so terrifying for everyone involved. One of the most famous cases involved a man who was murdered only 2 months after getting married. The investigation revealed his wife had been talking to MS-13 members the entire time, planning his murder while living under his roof. It wasn't just about the money. In many cases, these hits were carried out to gain favor with gang leaders, demonstrating absolute loyalty and ruthlessness. Authorities believe the group was linked to at least 6 murders, though the real number may be higher. What stalled the investigation was the complete lack of typical gang behavior. These women didn't wear tattoos. They weren't selling drugs or getting into street wars with rival factions. They lived seemingly normal lives right up until the bodies started piling up around them. Eventually, a joint task force between Salvadoran police and anti-gang units gathered enough evidence to move in on several suspects. Phone logs, bank records, and tips from former members finally helped authorities connect the dots. By 2017, multiple arrests were made, and the Black Widows were finally hauled into court for an intense, highly publicized trial. Prosecutors described them as cold, calculated killers who weaponized love to serve the interests of MS-13. They introduced evidence showing how the women coordinated every step, from the initial seduction to the final act of violence. Defense lawyers, meanwhile, argued that these women were simply scapegoats who had been coerced by male gang leaders or framed by dishonest informants. But in the end, the jury believed the evidence. Several members of the Black Widows were convicted of aggravated murder and conspiracy, receiving very long prison sentences. The conviction sent a massive shock wave across the entire region, not just because of the cruelty, but because they shattered every assumption about how women operate in organized crime. These weren't minor players. They were central figures in one of the most terrifying operations MS-13 had ever conceived. This case left law enforcement with some very haunting questions. If women could run such a lethal scheme, we have to wonder how many others are operating completely undetected. Today, the convicted killers are serving their time in the notoriously packed prison systems of El Salvador. But even from behind those bars, their story has had a profound impact. Their story is now a case study in recruitment strategies, psychological manipulation, and how criminal organizations adapt when traditional methods begin to fail. What truly separates the Black Widows from other associates isn't their capacity for violence. It is their cold, patient strategy. They use trust as a weapon, marriage as a shield, and intimacy as a fatal trap. These crimes weren't loud or public. They were quiet, methodical, and personal. For the men who fell for them, the end was final. Ultimately, the Black Widows proved a theory that investigators had been quietly debating for many years. MS-13 doesn't just rely on brute force. It thrives on manipulation, planning, and in some rare, horrific cases, love turned deadly. Number 9. Unnamed female MS-13 member. Interpol warrant, Maine arrest. In the spring of 2021, a small town in Maine far removed from the chaos of urban gang violence became the unlikely backdrop for a major international arrest. It started as a simple immigration check by US Border Patrol agents in a quiet neighborhood right outside of Portland. But that routine stop quickly spiraled into something much more significant. They had captured a woman wanted by Interpol for murder and known to be part of the MS-13 gang. Her name was never released publicly due to legal rules, but what authorities did reveal was enough to draw national attention to the case. She was a Salvadoran woman in her early 30s, living a double life under a completely fake identity. According to police, she had entered the United States illegally, crossing the southern border months earlier, before making her way up to New England. Her calm demeanor helped her stay hidden until a basic traffic stop forced agents to run her fingerprints through the system. Everything changed in an instant. The match triggered a red notice from Interpol's global database. It was a worldwide alert. She was wanted back in El Salvador for a brutal murder directly linked to her gang ties. Salvadoran prosecutors alleged she helped orchestrate the killing of a young man who had supposedly disrespected the criminal organization. The details of that crime were absolutely horrific. The victim was kidnapped, tortured, and killed, serving as a bloody warning from the gang to anyone else watching. Witnesses claimed she helped identify the victim and was right there when the act was finally carried out. Following the murder, she vanished. For several years, authorities in El Salvador were unable to track her down. It is believed she headed north through Mexico, using established smuggling routes to slip across the border without being detected. Like many fugitives with gang ties, she stayed away from big cities. She moved to a quiet rural area instead, living anonymously and avoiding attention. When federal agents finally arrested her in Maine, she did not resist. She claimed to be a migrant looking for work, but officials confirmed her true identity within just a few hours. While she sat in immigration detention, Interpol and Salvadoran officials filed an emergency request for her extradition. Investigators were struck by more than just the charges. They could not believe how successfully she had blended into society. During her months in Maine, she held low-profile jobs, rented a small apartment, and even participated in local community events. Her neighbors described her as someone who was quiet but friendly. No one ever suspected her of being in a violent gang, especially not one of the most notorious criminal organizations on Earth. Her arrest started a new conversation about how easily MS-13 members, particularly women, can move across international borders. Most people picture tattooed men and street violence when they think of this gang. However, many operatives handling planning or logistics are women. Because they draw less suspicion, they are frequently used for critical tasks. They deliver messages, run surveillance, and even help identify targets for future hits. US authorities are warning that this case is not an outlier. It reflects a growing and dangerous pattern. Women tied to MS-13 are crossing borders using false identities. They escape prosecution at home and operate quietly in places far from their usual gang strongholds. Their power comes from their invisibility. The woman caught in Maine is now back in El Salvador, where she stands trial for both gang affiliation and a charge of aggravated murder. Her legal team is challenging the evidence, but the prosecutors remain confident in their case. Multiple witnesses have already testified to her role in the killing. Her presence at the crime scene has been backed up by several different sources. If she is convicted, she faces decades in a brutal prison system. Her story is more than just one fugitive finally being caught and sent back. It serves as a reminder that MS-13's reach is vast, and their members often break the stereotype. Some are young, and many are female. They hide in plain sight. In that quiet Maine town where she was eventually caught, the news of her past came as a total shock to everyone. People struggled to connect the woman from the laundromat with the profile of a dangerous fugitive wanted for a gang-related homicide. But that disconnect is exactly why she was so hard to find and so dangerous to ignore. While her arrest didn't dominate the national headlines for long, for gang investigators, it marked a major success in the international fight against transnational crime. The whole ordeal served as a warning. MS-13 does not just stay in the city. It spreads carefully, sometimes showing up in the very last place you would expect. Number 10. An unnamed female MS-13 member with a record in Texas and Virginia. In the spring of 2023, Border Patrol agents near McAllen, Texas, came across a group of migrants attempting to cross the border illegally. During processing, one woman stood out. Her behavior was not frantic or worried. She was quiet and alert. When agents ran her fingerprints, the system hit a match that set off a chain reaction across several law enforcement agencies. She was a Salvadoran national. She had an extensive criminal history in the US and confirmed ties to MS-13. According to the Customs and Border reports, the woman had been previously deported following multiple arrests in Virginia. which included a conviction for embezzlement dating back to 2008. Her record showed a long pattern of fraud, identity theft, and confirmed gang involvement. Law enforcement found it most troubling that despite her previous deportation, she was back, traveling with smugglers through a very active MS-13 corridor in North America. At the time of her arrest, she was not carrying any weapons or drugs. She did not look threatening, but that's exactly why her presence was so alarming. Women with these gang ties often serve as low-visibility operators, moving messages, cash, or even people on behalf of the MS-13 leadership. Agents held her and began a full background review. What they uncovered was a woman with deep connections to gang cliques in both the United States and El Salvador. She wasn't a known street enforcer or a hitwoman, but her past crimes linked her directly to money laundering and gang-run businesses. Essentially, she was a facilitator, a vital cog ensuring the gang's criminal machinery never stopped grinding. Her past embezzlement conviction, once seen as a separate issue, now appeared to be a far more strategic move. Investigators believed she exploited her role at a Virginia firm to siphon funds and wash dirty gang money. She served her time and was sent back home, but the gang's grip on her never truly loosened. Her return to the United States was deeply alarming to federal agents. It signaled that her role in MS-13 was active. Deportees with violent gang ties rarely risk returning unless they are operating under orders or on a specific mission. Was she smuggling critical intelligence? Perhaps she was reviving East Coast cells or coordinating movements across the southern border. The truth remains buried. Following her second arrest, she was handed over to ICE for immigration crimes while Justice Department officials reviewed her case. Citing security and an open investigation, officials refused to let her name go public. Yet sources confirm she faces more than just deportation. A full criminal prosecution is now on the table. This rare move is reserved for high-priority gang targets. Her arrival in Texas, far from her old Virginia haunts, exposes exactly how MS-13 operates nationwide. Many assume gang activity is local, trapped in specific neighborhoods. But this case proves these criminal networks have no boundaries. MS-13 is mobile and adaptive, utilizing members who can ghost through communities without ever being noticed. This mystery woman was the perfect ghost. No ink, no flash, just a quiet traveler in rural Texas until her luck ran out. Her capture reveals a changing landscape, the evolving role of women inside the ranks of MS-13. Men usually grab the headlines for violence, but women are now mastering the gang's strategy, finances, and communications. These positions are no less critical and are often even harder to detect. For now, she remains locked away in federal custody. Whether she faces a judge here or gets shipped back to El Salvador remains unknown. Regardless, her arrest is a chilling reminder that MS-13 is more than its most violent killers. The organization relies on shadows in the background, facilitators who cross borders and maintain the networks required to achieve the gang's dark, long-term goals. You and I may never know her name, but her shadow work for the gang was just as dangerous as any bullet. To the agents dismantling MS-13, these subtle players are the most critical pieces of the puzzle. That brings us to the end of today's deep dive. Which of these criminal stories shocked you the most? Was justice truly served here? Let me know your thoughts and where in the world you're watching from down below. If you found this case fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe with notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for being here. Stay safe, and I will catch you in the next one.